how we think about one another, specifically in the context of the family. We wanted to then touch on how do we handle conflict in the family, because conflict is inevitable. It's part of life. It is certain to happen. If you can pull up Ephesians chapter 4, I want to read a passage of Scripture that's going to be kind of, for this series, it's kind of the anchor, or covers most of what we're going to talk about for the next 4 weeks quickly. And so Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 25. And I'll give him a minute to pull it up there. Sorry, not verse 1, starting at verse 25. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor. This is a very important part of conflict. Speak the truth. For we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. And if you can internalize that verse, those sets of verses, you will be, I'm convinced, at least 80 to 90% of the way to having healthy conflicts, healthy communication within your relationships. And it's very tempting for me to kind of dig in and just go verse by verse, because it's such a beautiful way to put it. But one of the things I wanted to start pointing out is conflict is inevitable. It's part of life, right? It's just, it happens. You can't avoid it. You know, he didn't say don't be angry, don't be upset. Be angry, but don't sin. You're going to have cause to be angry. It's going to happen. But when you are angry, don't sin. So conflict happens. It's born out of differences, right? And it only happens when we actually care. So a conflict can only arise if we have two people who feel differently about things and who actually care. So we often look at conflict as unpleasant. We don't like it. We don't want it. We wish there was no conflict. You know, you always hear that cute young couple that's been dating for a little while. We never fight. And, you know, you hope that before long they start fighting. Because if they make it all the way to their marriage, their wedding day, and they can still say, you know, we've never had a big argument. Well, as someone who's been married for over a decade, you're in for some trouble. Like if you made it all the way to your wedding day and you've never fought, or you never think you fought, because that may be one thing that one of them thinks one way or the other. No, we fight all the time. So it's inevitable. Conflict happens because people are different, because we have differences unavoidably, and because we care. Conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is a part of life. It's a necessary thing. It's a good thing. It can be healthy or unhealthy depending on how it's handled. So conflict is not necessarily, there's definitely damaging conflict. There's definitely, that's usually when we say fighting, and this title of the series is Fighting with Family, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, right? Because we shouldn't really fight. That's got the negative connotation of conflict, right? We shouldn't be punching each other out and really going to the mat and trying to hurt the other person. That's when I think of fighting, that's kind of the definition of fighting, is I'm trying to injure the other person in one way or another, right? We don't want to fight, but we do fight. We do have conflict. We do have, and the whole point, connotation of fighting is negative, and oftentimes that's our assumption of conflict in general. Conflict is always negative. Conflict is always divisive. It's always painful. It hurts. It's an opportunity for me to hurt my partner, for them to hurt me, hurt my friend. But it doesn't have to be negative. It can be healthy, depending on how it's handled. And before we talk about principles for healthy conflict, I kind of want to underscore conflict is necessary. Like it's an important part of life. It's a part of growth. If you go through life and you never find someone you're fighting with, it's because you're never bumping up against opinions that are different than your own. You're never bumping up against someone who challenges what you believe and presents an alternative. It's a part of, when you talk about organizations, it's a part of a healthy growth of an organization. If you have a team of people and they never fight, you're probably not growing. You're probably not getting better. You're probably just stagnating. You've got everybody thinking the exact same thing. So conflict is a part of a healthy organization. It's a part of a healthy relationship because it means you both care. It means all the people involved are invested. They want what's best. And what's inevitably going to happen when you've got multiple people who care passionately about something is they're going to find places where their shared concern for the relationship, their shared concern for what they're doing, causes them to advocate for different things. Well, it's important that we do this. Well, no, I think it's important that we do this. Okay, now we're in conflict. So how do we handle it? The other thing I'll point out before we talk about the principles of it is conflict is necessary for understanding. Because if you don't ever get to the point of disagreement, you're never going to find the places where you disagree. And again, it's, naive might be the best word, to assume that you're never going to disagree, that you already know everything the other person already thinks. You don't. You don't. And so if you truly want to understand the person that you're in a relationship with, whether it's our children, and this is one of those things that sneaks up on you as parents, because when they start their life, they don't have opinions, or they can't share their opinions. And then as they grow up, they start developing opinions, and sometimes they make us very clearly aware of their opinions, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just go along because they don't want to rock the boat, different personalities. So conflict is necessary to really understand. If you never are in tension with your spouse, do you really understand them? If you never have arguments and disagreements with your children, parents especially, I would watch out. You should, on a regular basis, have disagreements with your children because it means that you're finding the things they care about. You're hearing their true opinions, right? Now, and before I go there, the other thing that conflict is necessary for is for true peace. In a relationship, if you never have conflict, then you never grow, you never find that place of understanding. And so eventually what happens if you don't have the conflict is that you end up walking around on eggshells for your whole relationship. Because you know there's disagreements, but you've decided not to address them because we don't want the conflict. We don't want to bump into the sharp spots. We don't want to step on the Legos in the relationship. So we're going to be very careful about what we do. And you can't have peace that way. Conflict and its resolution is necessary for true peace in relationships. Brother Leo, if you can pull up Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. There's a verse that, to me, kind of captures all this very succinctly. There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. If conflict, this is why, when we start thinking about fighting with one another, when we start thinking about conflict, a lot of times our default reaction is, I don't want conflict, I want to avoid conflict, because very often, rash words in disagreement are like being pierced through. It's like being attacked and cut by the one closest to you. But the other side of it is that the tongue of the wise brings healing. Conflict can be divisive. Conflict can be hurtful. Conflict can be traumatic. But it also can be healing. It also can be cathartic. It also can bring understanding. And as I just mentioned, it's necessary for a relationship. So what is the difference between conflict that leads to pain, division, separation, lack of understanding, alienation, and conflict that leads to understanding, peace, trust, growth? Well, it's in how you handle the conflict. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about conflict in families. And in the next 3, we're going to speak on different portions of it. Today, I want to talk about If we're fighting with our family, which we inevitably do, we have to make sure we're fighting in good faith. If conflict is necessary, if it's unavoidable, it's unavoidable. Not only is it unavoidable, it's necessary. Not only is it necessary, it can be healing, lead to peace. If that's the case, when we handle conflict, we have to do so in good faith. So I want to give you some principles for healthy conflict, and depending on how much time we have, I may also talk through some rules for fighting fair, but we might have to save that for another time. I think we may run out of time before we get there. Principles for healthy conflict. 1 Corinthians 13 we talked about. It's that beautiful chapter on love. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we very purposely planned this series after the last series because the fundamental basis for healthy conflict is that it should be built on a foundation of love for the other person. It's built on unconditional love. So when we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, as Sarah put in her lesson, and I insert myself, I am patient, I am kind, when we're reading through 1 Corinthians 13, we should be able to have that same thing when we're in conflict, when we're fighting with our kids, when we're fighting with our spouse, when we're in a disagreement. I should still be able to say, my conduct is kind, my conduct is patient. I'm not seeking my own. I'm getting ahead of myself. So principles, and we'll dive into some of these a little bit more. But first off, it's got to be built on unconditional love. Healthy conflict is built on love for the other person. We want to assume the best in the conflict. Assume the best. Seek understanding. Be open to alternate viewpoints. Conduct ourselves with honesty and humility. And prefer the other person. So let's start with the assuming the best. In conflict, and I got to stop doing this at the beginning ones. Like, we'll talk about this more later. Let's talk about this more later. I'll just focus on what we're going to talk about today. But if conflict comes because there's a disagreement, there's a difference of opinion, there's a difference in how we approach something, in our belief about something, what we naturally do as people is we try to understand the other person. And we model out what they're thinking. This is actually a big part of child development. You'll notice the stage when they get old enough to recognize, oh, mom and dad have thoughts too. Oh, mom and dad, they get hungry just like I get hungry. Oh, they have their own internal thought process. And it's I forget what it's called. Do you remember, Sarah? That stage where people can recognize the reasoning in somebody else. It's not object permanence. It's something else. Metacognition. There's a name for it in the developmental, and I'm drawing a blank. I should have written it down. But part of that is in our relationships, we are always modeling the other person. We're always running in our head subconsciously, what are they thinking? What are they doing? And a lot of the stress of meeting new people, for those of us who are introverted, is I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know them well enough to know how they're going to take my words, what it's going to sound like to them, what their reactions are going to be. I don't know, for extroverts, I think that's exciting. It's like, I get to learn someone new. I get to be in a new, for introverts, it's not quite as exciting. It's a little more stressful. It's I don't know how they're going to take this, and it's another person I got to figure out. But that's a big part of how we live life, is we're modeling what the other people are thinking. And so a lot of times, when we have conflict, what we default to is trying to understand, why are they doing this? Why are they thinking that way? Why are they doing X, Y, Z? Or, if you have a disagreement and you're talking it through, internally it's, why do they think that? And whenever we start asking those questions, immediately we start making assumptions, right? Whenever we start trying to understand the other person, immediately we're trying to fill in the blanks. We're trying to understand. And that's the first thing I would point out, is we want to assume the best in all situations because we love the other person. I want to avoid assumptions as much as possible, right? That's, I think, an initial, really important part of the conflict is I'm going to avoid assumptions. I don't know. And I can guess and I can try and figure out, but rather than me, particularly if I'm not talking to them right now, if I'm, at home and, I'm trying to think of a good example. If I'm at home and I notice that Sarah said she was going to do something and she didn't, And I'm wondering, okay, why didn't she? This was really important to me. I told her it was important to me. Why didn't she do it? Or why did she do it differently than I expected? It's easy for me to start just saying, okay, well, she must be upset with me about this, and that's why she does, or she doesn't think this is important, or this, or that, or that, or that. And I can spend a lot of time just spinning and cycling and worrying and assuming and making judgments based on my assumption, and then building a case against her based on my assumptions. It'd be better for me just to say, you know what? I don't know. I expected this, but she didn't do it, so I'm just going to wait, and when we get together, we'll talk about it. But until then, I'm going to purposely avoid assuming I know anything about that, because I want to have the conversation with her, not with my own fears and paranoias. Absolutely.
Probably in my career, I've hired close to 200 to 300 people for sales jobs, sales roles. And the one distinctive quality that is very hard to figure out, but if you can figure it out, that is when somebody is presented with new information, they generally perceive it in a positive light or a negative light. And the same thing is true with emotions. Get information that you don't understand. Something's happened. You assume the best or assume the worst. If you always assume the worst, you're going to be in a cycle.
And that's, I was trying to throw you a microphone so the stream could catch you. But talking about brief summary for the live stream, and you missed it if you weren't here. But out of hiring hundreds, thousands of people over the years,
Hired probably 200 to 300.
200 to 300 people, one of the key indicators is when facing new information, that they don't understand, do you default to assuming the worst, the negative possibilities, or do you default to assuming the positive, the best possibilities? Because that's a part of life, and it's a part of conflict, is this unknown. How do we deal with that unknown? And if we love the other person, like we should in our family, like we've been talking about the last 4 weeks, I want to see them in the best light possible. I want to assume the best about them. So I am habitually late to things, not because I intend to be, but just because that's my nature, and I've built all sorts of coping strategies to make sure I'm on time for things, but that's just it. I have to build my schedule. I have to be very intentional about being on time to things. My default, just by nature of who I am, is to get focused on something I'm doing, and to the exclusion of everything else in the world, including time and space, and I'm focused on what I'm doing. And the clock continues to move, and I'm unaware. So this is one thing my wife has had to continually deal with in our marriage, is me not having the same concern for time that she does. And it would be easy for her to be upset with me regularly because I am regularly late. And it would be easy for her to say, well, he just doesn't care. Well, it's been years and he still doesn't care about this. At some point, no, I'm going to assume the best. He probably just forgot again. Yes, it's incredibly frustrating that he forgot again. It was just 5 minutes ago that I reminded him, but he already got sidetracked. He's not. Fortunately, my wife assumes the best about me. She loves me. And so she doesn't assume, well, he purposely is ignoring the reminder I just gave him. He likes me to have to nag him. That's because he enjoys it somehow. He's wanting to torture me. Well, no, that's not the case. Assume the best. And part of this, when you're in a disagreement, when you're in an argument, part of this means, this kind of bleeds into the next point of seeking understanding, that I come into an argument, and this is hard, this is easy now when we're just talking about it. It's hard when you're emotional. And I'll take a step back. Conflict can be inherently emotional. And that's not bad. It's not, emotions are a part of life. Emotions are a part of how we understand the world, of how they're an input that God gave us. And so when we are in conflict, emotions are going to rise, but we should be careful that emotions don't negatively drive the conflict into a negative, into a negative place. We have to be in control of our emotions, and we have to be gracious with our partner, the person our opponent. In this context, opponent, I very much mean the person who opposes you, not your enemy. Just on this topic, I'm taking this side and you're taking that side, and we are in opposition in the way that we think about this. That doesn't mean you're my enemy. We probably want the same thing, but we're on the opposite side of this issue. In that place, I need to be gracious with the emotions of myself and my opponent. So when I'm in this place, part of assuming the best means I want to strengthen my opponent's argument. I want to help them make their case as well as they possibly can, because it matters to them. We're only in conflict because they care. This is clearly important to them, just like it's important to me. So I don't want to try and manipulate them into not caring, because that's not going to work. This is important to them. And if I manipulate them successfully, all I've really done is rob them of power in the relationship and make them feel like they're not important in the relationship. So I want to strengthen their argument. I want them to be able to present themselves as clearly as possible. I'm going to assume the best. I'm going to assume that they care about this because they really see it as important to our relationship. This is really important to what we're doing. I'm going to look for ways to agree. I'm going to be looking. I'm assuming there's going to be things I don't understand, don't know. So I'm going to be actively trying to find places where, okay, I don't understand why you think this, but maybe it's this. Is this something we can latch onto as a commonality? Can we work on this as a starting point? Because I want to assume the best. One of the things that assuming the best does, in light of how emotional things can be, is it can disarm the emotional bombs that arise when we have conflict. Because one of the natural assumptions when we're fighting about something is that it's more than just the thing we're fighting about, right? I'll use parents and kids because I've been harping on, spouses for a bit here. But, what is the kid default assumption when mom says you can't do this? Well, mom just doesn't want me to have fun. Mom just doesn't like that. Mom just, she's out to get me. No, she's not. She loves you. She wants what's best for you. And when that's shown, it disarms that defensive mechanism, right? I get into conflict. I'm advocating for my position. I want to keep playing that game. I don't want to stop. It's not fair that I have to stop. Mom's just out to get me. Well, when mom shows clearly, I understand what's important to you. I want what's best for you, and I show you that in a number of ways. And you see me throughout your life assuming the best about you. I'm not looking for opportunities to ride you down and call you lazy or whatever. I'm trying to build you up. Then when we have a disagreement, it's easier for you to believe and understand, okay, like this is a good faith disagreement. I can have this disagreement. It's worth talking to mom about it instead of just getting angry. And of course, part of parenting is teaching children how to even do that. But it applies in our own, and really in all relationships, right? When I come into the disagreement assuming the best, assuming that you got good interest, you're looking out for the good interest just as I am, well, now I can have this on a much more even conversation rather than it being a fight, right? Now I'm not coming with my dukes raised, but I'm coming ready to have a conversation. Brother Gossett, did you have a... Okay. Let's look like I'm going to give you this in case you do. Assuming the best. Last thing I'll point on this one is part of assuming the best, and part of that avoiding assumptions as much as possible, is when we have to have conversations that are tough and difficult, we want to be fact-based as much as possible, right? We want to avoid speculation about their motives, about our own motives, and I want to stick it to what I know to be true. And I'll come back to that here in a bit. Seeking understanding. Another big part of having a healthy conflict is when you and having fighting in good faith, right? Having good faith conflict that's healthy is I'm coming into the conflict with the purpose of seeking to understand. That is more important to me than getting it right. Like, I may care very much about this topic. Maybe we're talking about, I don't know, I should have thought through an example conflict to motivate a lot of this, but maybe we're fighting about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good one from our past. One of the things I know that used to frustrate Sarah was how late I would be getting home sometimes from work. And coupled with, I've already given you some of the clues for this one, habitual lateness. In addition to driven by a focus on what I'm doing to the exclusion of other things. So a lot of times, 4:35, other people are kind of filtering out. They're not bothering me as much, so now I can really get some work done. And I'll work for a good half hour, put in that, and I'll head home, and then it's 2 hours. And then I'm not telling Sarah where I am because I'm not if I was thinking about it, I'd stop working and go home, right? If I had the presence of mind to stop and tell her, I'd say, oh, you know what, it's late, I should just go home. I should just text her, hey, I'm on my way home. But I'm not, because I'm heads down and thinking about something. And so now it's 2 hours later, and she's like, he's dead on the side of the road somewhere, and he hasn't talked to, what's going on? I've tried to call him, and he's not answering his phone because he silenced it because he was trying to focus. And now we have conflict. And I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. The resolution to this one was for me to have better coping strategies with the end of my day so that I can make sure I end on time. That was one where she was very much in the right, and I needed to modify my behavior. But it would be easy, I think, coming into that, for me to come with the idea that, like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to provide for my family. I'm trying to do good work. I'm trying to be a good employee. I've got important problems to solve. This is how I make money for our family. So why are you writing my case? Why are you so angry at me for just trying to, how many women out there would love for their husband to be working hard because their husband doesn't work, because they're struggling, and you're upset with me, and I'm coming into the conflict with my point of view, and my goal in this conversation is to make sure you understand why I'm right. And stop getting angry at me. If I came in that way, I am setting myself up for pain. I am setting myself up for pain. What I want to do, rather, I probably believe my point of view, because if I didn't, I would change. But before I go to promote my position and advocate for my position, what I want to do first is I want to understand what's your position. Why are you upset about this? I know why I'm upset about this, right? But I'm not interested in winning points. I'm not interested in getting my way because I love you. Again, building on that unconditional love. If you can pull up, Brother Leo, if you can pull up 1 Corinthians 13, start in verse 4. I'm not here to win, right? Go to verse 5, rather. It does not insist, love does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. I'm going to, if I need to take some time to prepare myself, I'm going to do that. But I'm going to come in. The goal of the conflict for me is not to win. The goal of the conflict is for us to understand one another and together forge a shared path forward. Like, my point of view matters. Your point of view matters. Again, we wouldn't be having a conflict unless we both cared. So I want to assume the best. I want to give as much weight and value to your position as I do my own. And then let's try and figure out what we need to do together. So before I try and explain why I'm right, I want to understand why you think you're right. I want to understand what you care about. So before I start jumping on this is what you need to do, this is why I did this is why I stayed late, it's important for these reasons, and we need to do my thing. The first thing I want to do is ask probing questions. Why are you bothered? What's bothering you? Why are you upset? Why are you? And I'm going to be non-judgmental. I'm going to separate my understanding from their position from the fact that I disagree with it, right? That's another thing that just takes practice. The ability to listen to something you disagree with without immediately jumping on all the reasons why it's wrong, right? Because a lot of times what happens is before they fully explained, I'm jumping in and I'm telling them why, oh, that's not true. Well, this isn't the case. Well, that's not the case. Well, this is, like, I know, like, I'm not dumb. I thought about all those, those two, but you didn't let me finish. You don't understand. You don't understand. You don't care. You just fine. You have it your way, right? So I've got to understand. I want to take the time to make sure I understand before we try and figure it out. Separate understanding from resolving the differences. Listening to understand instead of listening to respond. Exactly. And this is a perfect place to allow your opponent to be emotional, right? Because again, if they care, if this really matters, they're going to get emotional about it. Especially if they, out of love, have been trying to this not be a big issue. Well, I'm upset about this, but you know what? It's just whatever. I'm going to try and go along with it because it's not worth the conflict, right? It's not worth fighting about. Well, at some point, it becomes worth fighting about. And if you get to that point, now there's a lot of emotion that's been building up around this. And again, you actually want the conflict. You want the conversation. Because it's better to have it and to gain understanding than to not have it and gain distance from one another. So you've got to allow your other to be emotional and try not to be emotional yourself, or at least try to resolve your own emotions in a way that you can express into words, right? Because this understanding, a lot of times, you don't understand your own position. Not fully. You're upset. You're angry. You know what you feel. Do you know why you feel that? Why does this make you angry? Well, I don't know. Well, they're in the same position. Why are they so angry? They may not know. They're just upset about something. So before I'm going to resolve the conflict, I want to understand. I want to understand your emotions. I want to understand what's going on in your head. I want to understand why, and I want to understand me. Because I want to fight in good faith. And, but Leo, if you can pull up that first example. One of the things you'll notice, and especially those of you who've been doing this for a long time, this life thing, is, a lot of times conflict, I said it arises out of disagreement, right? It arises out of two people who have different views on something. But sometimes those two different views are literally just different views of the same thing. The conflict has arisen. There's not actually any disagreement. Has anybody seen this example before? It's an illusion called a Necker cube. And there's two ways to view this cube, this drawing of a cube. Can you see both ways? Leo, go to the next one. This is one way to interpret that drawing, right? Now, Leo, go one more. This is also a valid way to interpret the same drawing. Yeah? And pull them both up together, Leo. It's David's nothing box. You're both looking at the same thing, but you're seeing it two different ways. And if you don't stop to identify just that difference in perspective and that misunderstanding about how you're approaching it, you will spend hours yelling at each other, the purple one's on the right. No, the purple one is clearly on the left. And we have this huge argument about where the purple one is. And then at some point you recognize, oh, you see it like that. Well, yeah, that's what I meant. Well, but that's what I meant too. It's not what you said. Well, yeah, it is. And you find the cause of the misunderstanding. But if you don't stop and consider honestly the other person's opinion, if you come into a conflict unable and unwilling to be convinced, then you're not going to have a healthy conflict. A healthy relationship requires both parties to be willing to entertain the ideas of the other. It doesn't mean that we always find agreement. That's a very silly kind of simple example. But there are some things that we're going to have a disagreement about, and there is no resolution because we have fundamentally different principles, fundamentally different priorities that I am unwilling to change on this. But before I get to that point, I'm going to do everything I can to understand. And I'll throw this in. It's not really in my notes, and we're coming close, so I'll try and go quickly here. But this is one of the reasons why I feel personally it's so important to be willing to consider things that I disagree with. I will purposely find time to read books that I'm pretty sure I'm going to disagree with the author's conclusion. Or other ways around. I'll hear something, and I'll be like, that guy's completely wrong. Like, that's just a completely, like, how could they possibly believe that? That is so obviously stupid. Like, how would they, when I have that thought, my next thought is, okay, I need to figure out some way that they're explaining this. Like, have they written a book about this? Have they written something where I can read? Like, if I think this other person who is a rational human being, if I think they're so totally off, I can't even understand how they got to their conclusion, okay, I need to understand. I'm expecting I will probably still disagree with them, but I want to understand why. If I can't even articulate why they had that idea, how they justify that idea, then I have no hope of understanding them. And if it's some random person, that's maybe fine, right? There's plenty of people on Twitter, they say stupid stuff, and it's like, stuff I think is stupid. Let me clarify. They say things, and my default thought is that's just, it's like, it's not worth my time to understand, because I don't know that person, it's not something, so I don't. But if it's my spouse, if it's my kids, and they say something, I'm like, how can you possibly think that? Like, how can you possibly think that? What that tells me is I don't understand their thought process well enough. I am missing something. I'm missing perspective. And it very, very well may be that when we get to the end of that whole process of trying to understand, I still disagree. But now I do so respectfully, having considered their thoughts. And maybe now, even if I disagree, it helps me to not just blindly assume all these things about them, because, okay, at least I understand why you believe that. I think some of your premises are wrong, and that's leading, but I can understand. If you believe that, and here's a classic one, and I know I'm over time, my apologies. A classic one is the whole argument over abortion, and hopefully I don't get in too much trouble here, but because as the church, we have a very clear opinion about abortion, because it's very clear in Scripture. But if I'm at the point where I don't even understand why other people think differently, I'm never going to have a chance to have a productive conversation with them. Like, I fundamentally disagree with one of their key premises, which is that life doesn't really begin until some arbitrary point that's defined earlier, right? If it's true, if I accept as true that conception doesn't begin and it's not a human being until however long after, well then, sure, abortion's no different, early term abortion's no different than getting like an appendectomy, right? It's just cells in my body. I can understand why they have the position they have. But I also want them to understand my opinion. Put yourself in my shoes. If you believe that's not just another clump of cells, but that's a human being, not fully formed, still developing, but it's got a soul, it's got a plan laid out by God, well, now you can understand my position that this is a horrible injustice that's, unrivaled by almost anything else we could do. We come to very different conclusions, and you're very unlikely to convince me to change my mind, but I at least want to understand why you believe what you believe. Because that way I can avoid demonizing you, and we can have a productive way forward. And frankly, on some of these things, there may not be a productive way forward, right? And again, for something like politics, that's fine. For my marriage, that's not fine. We have to find a productive way to get forward. And maybe something we touch. Go ahead.
I just came across a quote the other day that I thought really resonated with this. It was just simply, before you put somebody else in their place, put yourself in their place. And that really resonated and seemed to apply here.
Absolutely. Last things, and I'll close. Remember that we want, as Christians, not just, above and beyond the love we have for our spouse, just as a point of who we are, our character, we should have humility and love, right? So if we go back to those verses in Corinthians, I don't need to be right. I'm not seeking my own. I don't need to be right. I'm coming into this conflict because I want what is best, because I care, because it matters to me that we do things the right way, that we have a future, that that my wife is not stressing out when I'm not late, that she's not getting mad at me and I'm not giving her cause to be mad at me. This matters for our future. But I don't have to be the one that's right. I want what's best for us. If it means I have to change my behavior, I change my behavior. If it means she changes hers, if we both, probably is more often the case, we both have things we can accommodate the other for, absolutely. I want to accommodate my wife. I want to accommodate my children. I want to give them the best that they can have. I don't need to be right. I want them to be healthy. There's a difference. And a lot of times, as a parent, me being right is the same thing as them being. What I want is what's good for them. So I am right. But I am careful that that's not why I'm not coming in to be right. I'm not looking to punish, but I'm looking to find a shared path forward. That's the verse 6, I believe, if you can put 1 Corinthians 13:6 up. It's the love doesn't rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices at the truth. I'm not looking for an opportunity to punish my opponent. I want to find a path forward. And I'll close with this. When you come into fighting, when you come into conflict, we have to always remember, why are we in conflict? And not just to fight, but why are we in conflict? Because we have a difference that we need to resolve that we both care about. And I'm going to strive to fight for us together rather than against my partner. I'm going to fight for our shared understanding, for our relationship. And that's why we're having this disagreement, because we both believe this and we both want what's best. So we're fighting together to figure out what's the best thing for our relationship, rather than me fighting against you. And sometimes just that mental switch can help. I'm in conflict with my spouse because we together want to move forward. I'm in conflict with my children because we together want to be a healthy family. I'm not fighting against them. And so I'm willing to consider. I hope this has been helpful. I know I'm a bit over time. I apologize. We got a late start, so I'll take that as an excuse. Next week, we will be continuing this conversation, specifically about being allowed to be wrong. You and them. And so we'll dig into that next week. Thank you for your time. We love you and look forward to having our service in a couple minutes. We'll take a short break. We'll have worship, and we'll begin our main service. Praise the Lord.